Hello and welcome to episode 5 of Outtakes. And I am Elizabeth Plummer. And this year, my colleague and I, Jeff, we built a course on using AI in English language teaching. And I really love being an English language teacher because I think the community is the best community of any of the disciplines. Not only is it like worldwide because we have English language teachers everywhere. I mean, all disciplines, you have teachers everywhere, but ones where you can actually talk to each other and communicate with each other because you all have a shared language, but also because we're so generous and giving of our time and our knowledge and of everything. I don't know. What about you, Jeff?
Yeah, I think it's the same. It's one of those things that I find really kind of fun about it, where it's like no matter where in the world I go and meet English teachers, the mentality is still the same. Languages might be different, cultures might be different, beliefs might be different, but we still have this, I don't know, there's this core kind of frame of mind that just teachers where it's like I always like to joke with people that teachers are just generous thieves because we're like, oh, I could take that and use it in my class. Like we're always like thinking something happens. Ooh, I could use that for my students, and I think it's just kind of a fun way to be like we're all so similar.
Well, and we're all excited when someone else is
Yeah,
like, I love that idea. We're like, ooh, someone liked
great.
my idea,
Yeah.
right? Like
Uh-huh.
they're going to use it now. So if you've missed our previous episodes, in these sessions, in these outtakes, we kind of talk about things that didn't make it into the course, as well as things that have changed since we built the course, because emerging technology is a rapidly changing thing as we're learning more about it as companies continue to introduce it. And today we're talking all about assessments. So let's go ahead and get that first question. What advice can you give to an instructor who is worried about students using Gen AI to do their work for
Mhm.
them? Well, this is such a big question. I get asked this a lot. I don't know about
Right.
you, right? Because we're all really worried in the field. It's, I think, especially of English language education, because a lot of the first generative AI models were producing text, and that's what we have our students do.
Exactly, and it's getting more and more, challenging to discern. Those early AI models, you could very clearly tell, a machine wrote this. Now it's getting a lot trickier because again, more data, the more refined it can be. And so, I would say for me, something I say to educators a lot is just how can you bring the act of writing more to the surface, and more have it more present, between you and your student or, in the classroom. And so, I think we touched on this a bit in episode 5, but, I think about like, you know, doing more in-class writing, doing more, having students actually write in class and get them, working through so you can see the act of writing a little bit more. I talk about using Google Docs quite a bit so I can see my students when they wrote, how they wrote, what got changed. So like things like revision history in Word or Google. And then, working with the student to say, okay, this is a rough draft and that's fine. Now, if you want to use AI to clean this up or to ask this, I think that can be really helpful. Letting them know that one, it's okay to use it, but two, you have to make something first. It can be a brainstorming partner. It can't be a writing, hire.
Yeah. One of the things I think about is uh, several years ago when I was doing my PhD, we won't say how many years ago, I took a multimedia design class, and the instructor at the end of the class, he said, what if the skills that we're teaching right now aren't going to be important in the future, right? Like, and he gave the example of reading. He said, we have at the time the text to speech models were just really starting to get pretty good. I mean, to the point where I was having the text to speech programs read journal articles to me
Hmm.
while I was folding laundry and stuff, so that I could keep abreast of some of the research without having to sit down and read and make note of which ones I wanted to go back and read more in depth. So he said, in that example, do students actually really have to learn how to read in those elementary grades in the future? In the elementary grades, instead of teaching reading, maybe we're teaching other skills because students just have things read for them or they're in other formats. And I don't know if that's like a direction that we want to go in terms of education, where we don't teach some of these skills which help students to develop, critical thinking and problem solving skills. But I
Right.
do think that we need to question what skills our students actually do need, and whether or not we're holding on to something that is not a skill that they need. For example, I have a colleague who really holds on to the idea that you have to have two spaces after a period, right? And I I respect them, I value them. The students, work within that quirkiness, and but they know that it's not a skill that their students need. So even though they're
Pull
holding
it
on to
down
that
a little.
idea, right?
Definitely.
Like, yeah, so we're going to start a new movement. Let's get those double spaces after the period. Again, I'm gonna have to retrain my typing skills to do that, right?
Right.
And so I really respect that he holds on to that, but he also recognizes that's not really a skill that these students need. So I'm not going to push that in my writing class. They teach writing. I'm not going to push that in my writing class that you have to have those two periods onto it. And so I think it's a good example of, like, maybe it's a silly example of an instructor who's shifted a mindset to recognize what are the skills my students actually need.
And I
Um,
think that's true of like, let's redefine what these mean. So like, you talk about reading and, in common parlance, people say that now. I was reading this book and then you find out they're using the audiobook. It does it still count? Sure. And I think that's one of those things like with technology's influence and with like even AI's influence into the classroom is redefine or at least come to terms with you between you and your students what constitutes writing. And I remember when speech to text started becoming kind of prominent, and I was telling my students, I'm like, I don't care about your typing skills. If you want to turn on that microphone and just talk, and that's your first draft where you're just sort of getting your thoughts out, because I'm a fan of I think I've said it before, Stephen King, where he says writing begins at the paragraph level, and so I'm like, just get your ideas on the page. I don't care how, and then we'll start writing. So for me, writing involved talking it out. That I even told students one time, just start drawing or doing whatever it takes, just get the ideas out so we can have something to work with. I'm okay if they didn't actually physically write something with a pen or with a keyboard.
Yeah,
You know?
I do something similar with my students when they have that writer's block because they see
Yeah.
that blank screen and stuff. I'm like, instead of that blank screen, why don't you just create a voice note where you send yourself a little voice note and then you have it transcribe it for you of some of the thoughts you have it transcribe it for you, and then you're starting writing. I mean, that's what writing is. Let's move to the next question. What are some considerations regarding students using Gen AI when it's not a part of the assessment? And I know a lot of instructors are sort of grappling with this. My students are using it. My students are using it. And I know my students are using it. And I've been thinking about this a lot because there's research that's come out in the past couple of months that are showing that instructors actually aren't really good at detecting AI use. And this led me to question whether or not instructors of English who are teaching sort of beginning and intermediate levels, whether or not they might be able to detect it better, or whether or not Gen AI might actually be able to write at those levels and students are able to manipulate it so that it sounds like they wrote it. Now, obviously, if a student who's a beginning level turns in something that's beautiful and cohesive and uses advanced vocabulary that not even you would use, you're going to be able to detect it. I don't know if I have an answer to that question, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on this particular question.
Yeah, I think even just starting with that, again, talking about like what does it mean, and defining, I think with students in the class, okay, what's cheating? Like let's define that term so we all agree this is cheating and this is not. So if we say external help, you know, if I go to a writing tutor, if I use AI as a tutor, what's the difference? I think really kind of helping students start to understand, and that could be that whole transparency in teaching, that kind of tilt stuff we talked about in the video of just like very clearly saying, we're doing this because I need you to learn this skill. You need to learn this skill because blank, and being very clear in your your assignments of like why we're doing this. And so yes, the easy route would be this, but I don't want you doing it that way. Other things I think about too, and this is something I've started thinking about for next semester, is when my students write, they're going to have surprise presentations. I'm like, all right, get up and tell us about your what you wrote, and see if they know it. And doing some more of those informal testing things. Doing more handwriting in class, or typing in class, being like, hey, we're just going to sit down and this is going to be a writing session today, so I can actually see you all writing that as well. So the more you can kind of bring, as I said earlier, bring the writing process out in front of you, between you and the student, I think would be better off. And I also think it's better for students. We can start thinking about that flipped classroom. Hey, go do the readings and the listings, and I don't care if you use AI to summarize it. Go for it. Go do all that. But when you come to class, we're doing the act of writing because I want to be involved with it. I want you to do it. I want to see you doing it. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. The only thing I think about, like in the shift where we're saying let's do more handwriting, let's do more, is that I primarily teach languages online, and although
Mm.
this semester I took a little bit of break, next year I probably will start teaching again, language classes online, and that's not really an option
Yeah.
for my students in those classes. And um, a lot of those students, their motivation is to pass the class so they can move to the next level. And so they don't actually care about the learning that happens.
Right.
They just want the grade, right? And they know they can get the grade really fast if they just have Gen AI produce whatever it is.
When I was
And
in an IEP, that's what I saw. Students were like, my family is pressuring me to get out of this and start taking academic classes. So they're getting pressure on multiple fronts.
yeah, yeah. It's so hard. And so I started, and I'm going to continue, as I take up the classes next year, really trying to figure out and understand what is motivating the students, and then help them try to understand how what it is that they're being asked to do will help them to get there. So if my student, because I often teach lower levels, beginning and intermediate, if my student wants to move to that next level, I need to show how they have to have the skill in order to be able to move to that next level,
Right.
right? Not just get the grade, because get that passing grade, you won't be successful, and then you're going to fail, and it all comes toppling down. Earlier this year, I met up with a student who I had in a level 3 reading class, and they used picture translators, where you just hover over
Hmm.
it and it translates
Yeah.
so much in the class, and I kept trying to get them to stop using it. And so they barely passed the class because they had barely developed enough reading skills. And so now they're in level 4, which is in the program is teaching in, is the level right before you enter academic classes. And that's the student's goal, is to enter the academic classes. And they were saying, I just don't understand any of the reading. And I was saying, you have your phone right here on a lanyard hanging over your neck, so that the first thing that you do is pull it up and translate everything,
Yeah.
right? I said that is why you're not progressing, and the work is hard. So if you want to reach that goal, then we have to figure out ways for you to stop doing that. And I worked with the student about things first, getting the phone off their neck and out of easy access, right? I said that's the first step. As soon as you put a barrier between you and whatever crutch you're using, you're going to start to reduce that. But then also, um, the student didn't like reading was another issue, right? So they
Right.
didn't like reading, and I said, so how about you start by you watch a lot of videos, watch the videos in English, watch the videos in English, and put the closed captioning on. Right. And so now the
Right.
student is reading and they said, yeah, I'm going to try. I said, so start doing that. And as your first step to reading to try and get you to where you want to go.
Just getting them to realize like you're just delaying this, like when because when they get into a physics course or something like that, and I remember my IEP students, they would often matriculate into academic courses and they would just take math courses right off the bat. So like I get math, I don't need a lot of language for math, and they'd start to feel confident that they could handle it, and then they'd get a art class or a history class, and then suddenly they were just completely like shell shocked, and it's like this is why we did what we did, and this is why we were working on that, and I think having times to have that conversation, and I think even if that's something where I know REP has done this where they've taken students to actual full-on academic courses so they could sit in on them a couple of times during the semester and actually experience what it's like as a way for them to do some sort of self-reflective idea of like, oh no, I couldn't follow that at all, or it's like, no, I'm feeling okay about that. So I think another part of that too is getting students to realize, hey, this is why we're doing this. Maybe it means getting them out and about into the university to get those experiences before they matriculate, right?
Yeah. I don't want to like only talk about the academic, but in elementary, because I taught in the elementary schools as well. I did the same things with the students there, right? And a lot of times the motivations for those kids were making friends. I do want to acknowledge that there are places where students are required to take the class they have, and then they do nothing with it. And
Mm.
I really feel for those instructors because as much as you want to, their motivation is probably never going to change
Right.
to away from wanting to get that grade. And so I think they're going to be the hardest ones navigating this, you know, because the students don't see any value in it. The university or wherever they are, their employer, whatever, is saying they have to do it. And I don't actually have a lot of advice for them other than to make sure they sleep at night and don't stay up late worrying about it, but just
Yeah.
do the best you can. Know that you're a good teacher, and utilize things like the tilt framework that we highlighted in the course, and the AI assessment scale or other things, and leave it at that, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes we can only do as much as we can do.
Right. That's it.
Yes, this was fantastic. It was a lot longer than what
A
we
little bit
thought
longer.
in
No, it's fine.
planning. We had a lot more to
Even though it was our
say.
shortest video.
It was our shortest video. Thank you guys for joining us on this interesting discussion about assessment, and we'll see you in our final episode 6.